After you interact with Miquella's cocoon, you're transported here to a small cave that opens up to a view of this, what they're calling the SHOUTOUTS. And underneath this is an open plain. It's called the Spirit Grave Plains, and it's pretty huge. We had 3 hours with the game, but I only had time to explore a fraction of this. We were told that there were 2 legacy dungeons in this area, so finding those became my first objective. I managed to beat both of the end bosses of those legacy dungeons, and I also took down a ton of notes, so I have a lot to share with you guys today. This isn't my footage, but I did the exact same thing this character is doing now, which is to go right towards the Wicker Man in the distance. The map of this area says that the entire expanse is marred by the harrowing ravages of war, and this guy is obviously one of the vestiges of that war. We know from previous trailers that these fought on Messmer's side during his attempt to purge the Land of Shadow. You know how everyone fights the Erdtree Sentinel as soon as they first start Elden Ring? This is a lot like that. This boss takes like no damage, and I think you'd probably be better off fighting him later on. So that's what I did. I bravely ran away towards this area that you see ahead of me. This is a crossroads. It's an intersection between Castle Ensis on the right and Ballarat Tower Settlement on the left. Little did I know though, the fire giant was still aggroed onto me this entire time, so he came up behind me and killed me while I was talking to these 2 NPCs.
Fie, another, treading the heels of Miquella. Then, as that woman would surely say, we are in our purposes well aligned, but understand, your kind are not forgiven. The Erdtree is my people's enemy, by Marika long betrayed, set aflame. I believe Miquella's apologies when he says our delivery will come, but never will I see your kind as worthy.
Okay, so that character you just heard talking, his dialogue cuts off there in this footage. However, while I wasn't able to record footage at the event, luckily I can type as fast as NPCs can talk, so here's the dialogue you just heard, and here's the other dialogue he spoke that I wrote down. I transcribed all of the dialogue from all 8 NPCs that I met, but this might be considered spoilers to a lot of people, so I'll only share it later in the video. By the way, this is the entrance to Ballarat, the Tower Settlement. This was the first legacy dungeon I explored. And this is where we get to talk about the new weapons. These weapons were a highlight of the DLC. You find so many incredible ones really early on. As a reminder, there are 8 new weapon categories being introduced in the DLC, and here you can see the character has a new throwing weapon equipped and some new magic. Now the character switches weapons to equip the Dryleaf Arts, a new type of hand-to-hand combat. So yeah, we're getting 8 new weapon types, but before today we only knew the names of 5 of these new weapon types, but now all 8 have been revealed. The last 3 weapon types are perfume bottles, light greatswords, and beast claws. You're about to see the beast claws. Even with these new weapons, this rooftop section was difficult. I actually got knocked off by these birds and I fell down here to a sort of sewer filled with these fly creatures that you can see off to the left. I have some lore to share on these, and I think it relates to them. One of the talismans I found was called the Ailment Talisman, and it reads, "When the weak were infected with the dreaded fly sickness, they perished well before the metamorphosis could take hold. Oddly, those who cared for the infected and made sure they were given a proper burial were never afflicted themselves." Also, this is where you get to see one of the new perfumer weapons. By the way, again, the place we're exploring is called Bellarat Tower Settlement. From a distance you can see this enormous tower coming out from the settlement, and clearly the settlement was built around it. So what is this tower? Well, I found an item in this area called the Bone Bow, which imbues arrows with vengeful spirits, and it explains how the tower was once a place for ancient hexing arts. Maybe that explains why we're fighting so many spirits in this area. But I think this tower is hiding a huge secret, because in front of the tower I found a note that explains where this tower leads. Apparently it leads to the Gate of Divinity, which I think could explain the very nature of the lands between, as well as everything we saw with Marika in the previous trailer. So the tower is our objective, but to get there first we have to defeat the divine beast that guards it. This is the divine beast, Dancing Lion, and it's tough. They said this was the easier boss of the two, but I disagree. I had a way harder time with this one, and it took me 3 or 4 attempts to defeat. Briefly here, we see the player use a new weapon, a thrusting shield, but there are some attacks you can't block against. The remembrance of the Dancing Lion tells us that when the Impaler's army assailed the tower, the ritual of the lion dance was turned towards martial ends, its divinity, its fury, its light-footed beauty. And according to a charm I found, divine beasts are messengers of the heavens, and their rage mirrors the tumult of the skies, of which storms are the pinnacle. After defeating the divine beast, I went across that bridge in the distance, and I cleared the second legacy dungeon, which is called Castle Ensis. There's no footage I can show of that, but afterwards I did actually come here and I noticed these guys fighting. This player is about to show off the new reverse hand swords, and also this new multi-shot crossbow. So this player is about to make their way into a nearby dungeon. Now, I only had time to clear 2 overworld dungeons, but the 2 I did find were extremely unique. You can tell that they put a lot of effort into the dungeon designs, that I found at least. And luckily, this player is going into one of the dungeons that I actually found. It's called the Ruined Lava Forge Intake. You might recognize it from a previous trailer. It's this one, with the long intake pipe you can use as a bridge. That phantom right there says, "By grace, if I ever see another rock, I shall find it, of this I have no doubt. The altar of the forge cannot be far." The altar of the forge he's looking for is at the end of the dungeon. It's this thing, from this screenshot. Interestingly, there's no boss in this dungeon that I could find, but instead I looted the Anvil Hammer, one of the treasures of the ruined forges. This next clip shows off the last new weapon category we haven't yet seen, the Light Greatsword class. This Light Greatsword in particular is called Milady. these new weapons are really something. I guess light greatswords basically then are weapons with the length of a greatsword, but with an elegant moveset that makes use of how light the weapon is. Okay, so weirdly, this clip and all of the remaining footage that I have to show you is of places that I'm almost certain we couldn't access in our preview build of the game. I think these places exist if you progress past the second legacy dungeon in this starting area, but they were watching very carefully to make sure we didn't do that. I don't think we could get to these places, but regardless, this is probably a good point for us to transition into what will be the second part of this video, where from this point on, I'm going to go into extreme detail on everything I experienced, even stuff that I can't show. So that means every item description, every NPC I met, and I'm also going to talk about what's actually inside that second legacy dungeon, which is called Castle Ensis. Honestly, I'd only really recommend watching this point onwards if you're extremely lore hungry and you just really want to know everything you can about the story before you play. So pause the video, think about whether this is for you, because my goal on this channel is to enhance your enjoyment of these games, and if you think going in blind or blinder would enhance your experience, please do that. With that said, let's start at the very beginning, at Miquella's Cocoon. So, when you first arrive at Mohgwyn Palace to enter the DLC, someone is already there before you. Her name is Leda, the Needle Knight. I won't narrate all her dialogue, but this is what I've transcribed, so feel free to pause the video and read all of that. But basically, she's the character who has talked a few times already in previous trailers, and you might have seen her recently in this incredible concept art that they put out. Basically, Leda is the de facto leader of Miquella's band of faithful followers that seem to be tracking him throughout the DLC. Now, you touch Miquella's Cocoon, and you're instantly transported to this cave. There was no cutscene for us, but I wonder if that's because maybe they already activated the cutscene when they were setting up this build for us to play. Regardless, you head out into this plain that's full of graves and what's called spirit grave grass. The Skadu tree looks over it all, and we know the name of this tree from a Shadow Realm rune, which is basically just a consumable rune that says the Skadu tree is the shadow of the Erd tree. No wonder Grace shines ever so brilliantly. So apparently golden remnants of grace are still bestowed upon those who fall in the realm of shadow. And there's another item that talks about it. It's a Skadu tree fragment, which says, it is said that when the Skadu tree crumbles from its core, that it will scatter across the entire realm of shadow. The people of the Erd tree collect the splinters and use them in prayer. The icon for the Skadu tree fragment looked just like that black burnt Erd tree, but with the golden sort of syrup inside. And these fragments were important because these are the fragments that give you a bit of a damage boost or a damage reduction exclusively when you're within the Shadow Realm, and I think they're meant to really motivate you to explore the open world, because I found the vast majority of these in the open world. I didn't find any, I don't think, in a legacy dungeon, so they're really meant to motivate your exploration. Another item that's similar to these that you also hand in at a site of grace are revered spirit ashes. Now, these are an item that when handed in bolster both your summoned spirits and Torrent's ability to deal and negate damage. Obviously in Torrent's case it just reduces the damage you take. But again, these have no influence outside the Land of Shadow. And speaking of summoned spirits, I found 3 in the DLC, and each of them had really good lore associated with them. The ash I used the most were the Finger Creeper ashes. Finally, we get lore on the Finger Creepers. I used this in my Lion Dancer fight. It actually came in really clutch because I was about to die, but then the Finger Creeper used an AoE heal and got me through the fight, and I think that's the fight I ended up winning on. The other Spirit Ash that I think was the strongest was called Andreas Black Knight Commander, and here's the description for that one. I think, if you pause and read that description, I think that might be the most lore-significant description that I wrote down out of my entire play session. But I don't have too much time to speculate on this video. I will just say it's very interesting that it says Messmer fled from the Erd Tree. Did he assault or burn the Erd Tree, maybe? The summon is very strong, it uses a lot of FP, and it looks obviously just like the Black Knight commanders that I'm showing in these screenshots. The third and final Spirit Ash I found were the Gravebird Spirit Ashes. Now, the Gravebirds are this enemy that you can see in the footage. There were also a lot of them sort of sitting on top of trees to the left here in this scene. You can't see them, but they were guarding a small mausoleum here. And inside this mausoleum, there was a fairly difficult NPC boss that uses the crossbow. He's basically this NPC that we saw in a previous trailer, except in phantom form. He didn't drop the crossbow when I defeated him, but he did drop his greatsword and his armor, which describes him as a Knight of the Solitary Jail. Next, the biggest revelation in the DLC, bar none, is that the worms, I can confirm, are friendly, until they're not. If you hit them, well, you'll see. Anyway, when you first enter the DLC, you know, which direction you set off in is such a defining moment, but I think most people will eventually find their way to these crosses of Miquella that have been left behind, partly because it's very close to the fire giant, which I think also draws your attention, but also these crosses just stand out from such a distance, and I think that is their purpose. They don't actually do anything except give you some lore. When you touch the cross, it says carved words coalesce, and the words at most of them said something like, "I abandon here the first of the flesh of my body." Clearly these are left behind by Miquella, and clearly his whole entourage are following these crosses as well, so you often find NPCs here. This NPC at the back there is named Freya. Basically, she used to be one of Radahn's followers, but now she follows Miquella instead, and she recommends that you talk to who she calls her dour little friend. And if you talk to him, he does give you a map of the cross's whereabouts, which is basically like a little hand-drawn map that tells you about 3 nearby crosses that are, and I quote, Miquella's footprints. So that's Freya. But the man you talk to for the map, I think, is called Hornsent, but I'm not sure if that's his name or if Hornsent are just a race of beings instead. Later, we learn that the Lion Dancer is essentially sent from the heavens, and since it has horns, I speculate that the horned race that once occupied Ballarat Tower Settlement might be called the Hornsent. The word is actually referenced as well in some items I found in the Tower Settlement. These tender items in particular seem to make it clear that the Hornsent were once a part of this society's upper echelons. But then his people were betrayed by Marika and set aflame. This explains why this Hornsent man is so upset with us, since we're a tarnished who has had Marika's grace of gold restored to them. And maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but I guess his face is actually made up of horns. I thought they were worms at first. Before you enter Ballarat Tower Settlement, there's a small camp off to the left here that you can't see, and it features 2 more members of Miquella's faithful followers. Their names are Ansbach and Moore, and luckily we've got pictures of them from previous trailers. Let's talk about Moore first. He's a bit of a gentle giant, and he sells things. Things, he says, bring joy to all. I'll list a couple of the more interesting descriptions from items he sold on screen. Notably, there was knot resin and a sealed spirit spring note. The other NPC here, and I might be butchering their name, but their name was Ansbach. He's a man who's put his fighting days behind him, and now instead he dedicates himself to discerning Miquella's true purpose in the Land of Shadow. It's an important reveal because it reveals that those who follow Miquella do so out of faith. They probably can't claim to know his true motives. It seems you can progress Ansbach's questline by discovering more of Miquella's crosses, and apparently there are 6 total in this area. Curiously, Ansbach was once in service to Lord Mohg. I wonder if he abandoned Mohg at some point when he realized what was being done to Miquella. And this brings up another important question, which is that I wonder, is Miquella affected by what Mohg has done to his body in the Lands Between? And we might have a bit of an answer taking shape here, because there's what looks like a sort of plant growing in the Land of Shadow called the Empyrean Blood Burgeon. It looks a lot like the sacramental buds that grow in the Lands Between. And like the sacramental buds, it has a description that seems to relate to Miquella's blood, and it reads, Empyrean Blood Burgeon, said to burgeon forth from where the golden blood of Miquella, the wounded Empyrean, pooled. So another of Miquella's titles is the Wounded Empyrean, and I wonder if these wounds came at the hands of Mohg. Anyway, after entering Ballarat, I looted a black firefly inside, which is a butterfly item similar to the other ones in Elden Ring, and where those butterflies are clearly referring to other demigods, this black firefly is clearly a reference to Messmer. As seen in the trailers, this tower settlement is the place that was heavily assaulted by Messmer's forces. Ash is found piled up all throughout the city, very similar to how it is in Leyndell. Clearly this place has been burned before, as you saw in the trailer. I also found some left behind Messmer Fire Grease, which is a type of weapon buff, and it explains how fire was a symbol of Messmer's crusade. Most of the enemies in the city are spirits, but there is also a red phantom who gloats about how Messmer is going to kill everyone, and he taunts us as he attacks us. But there are a few horned enemies left in the city. One of them is this enemy, which we have concept art for. It's quite small in-game, it's about the same size as your character, but unfortunately I didn't get any lore on this enemy. The other horned enemies are these horned knights, who are extremely difficult. They essentially never stop attacking, and they seem to have infinite poise, making them this near constant threat. So clearly there is a presence of the horned faction in this city, even after being burned by Messmer. Around this time I checked which talismans my character was wearing, and one of them was the Outer God's Heirloom, and it references a clan who lost everything in the Great Fires. I'll let you read for yourself how intriguing this description is. These items are all hinting at a truth that we can only really guess at so early on. Another huge description was from this sorcery, which I believe you can see here in this footage, and this one seems to hint at the sorcerous origins of the fingers. Another thing you can find in Ballarat before the Lion Dancer is an old woman, who you eventually realize is a character who is speaking in the Lion Dancer cutscene, rousing the lion to life with this impassioned speech. Here's her dialogue. According to an item I found, I don't remember its name, but we learn from this item that this old woman is called the Empyrean Grandam. I think Grandam kind of means like a shaman or a grandma kind of figure, and she says that she wants to take vengeance upon Messmer and his lot. Now, the old woman doesn't talk to you after you kill the lion. She's basically depressed that you've killed her keeper. However, there is a way to get more dialogue out of her, and the guy next to me, Jeremy Ray, a journalist and a friend, he figured it out and he has the dialogue, so if you're interested, please talk to him about it, because I don't quite want to spoil that yet. After I defeated the bosses at the end of both Legacy dungeons, I went back to the Round Table Hold and handed in their remembrances. The Remembrance of the Dancing Lion grants us a new Frost Stomp Ash of War, or alternatively, you can hand it in for a charm that I think summons a sort of apparition from above you that chases enemies, though I'm not too sure about that one. After the fight with the Divine Beast, you ascend the Tower of Ballarat, and the view up here is incredible, but all you can really do here is look around because shadowy thorns block the way forward into the tower. And there's a note here that's been left behind by Needle Knight later, and it reads, "The gate of divinity lies in the tower sealed by shadow. This is surely where kind Miquella is headed. We are no Empyreans, but we must locate the path that will lead us there. I will follow the crosses east." This item description also potentially contains another huge revelation, as it mentions a gate of divinity in the same paragraph that also mentions Empyreans. If I had to guess, this might be the gate of divinity that represents an ascent into godhood, and that's where Leda thinks Miquella is headed, because he is an Empyrean looking to become a god, you'd think. So we can't go this way, but obviously the way we have to go is east, and that's the way I went next, to Castle Ensis, the second legacy dungeon we could experience, for which I have no footage to show you. For this second legacy dungeon, I switched characters. So previously I was playing a sorcerer build that I had respec'd into a dex build that could make use of a great katana that I was wielding, and that's what I defeated the divine beast with. However, when I respec'd as the knight, I found my favorite weapon so far. It's called the Smith Script Hammer. It's a great hammer, but it has throwing attacks. If you do a charged R2 or a jumping R2 or a running R2, you'll spin and just yeet the entire hammer at enemies in the distance, dealing a ton of damage if you actually hit with it. It's incredible. It feels so good. I also love that they're giving special treatment to these older weapon categories and giving some of these weapons ranged attacks as well. Quality builds are going to be eating really good in this DLC, I think. This hammer carried me through all of Castle Ensis. Castle Ensis is essentially like a carrion stronghold. It's filled with moon knights and magical enemies. The entrance to it has a cross of Miquella, and at its base is another letter from Leda, proof that indeed she did come here next. How you get inside this castle is really cool. So the main gate is closed, so you have to pick a path across a waterfall to the side and infiltrate this watery secret pathway to get inside. Once you're there, there are all these teleporting nobles casting glintstone pebble at you from the rooftops as you progress through the city. It was a fantastic experience pushing through this place. It was a lot of fun. The boss of this legacy dungeon is named, and you're going to think I'm trolling, but her name is Rellana. Not Renala, Rellana. She's the younger sister of Renala, and she renounced her heritage to chase after Messmer. She wields these twinned swords. She's a lot like Pontiff Sullivan from Dark Souls 3. One of her swords is imbued with black fire, and the other one is imbued with magic. I managed to beat her on my second try. The great hammer I was using was OP again, and when I handed in her remembrances, you could choose from either her twinned swords, or you could get her twin moon sorcery. I love the line of this description that says, "Here and here alone were moon and fire, ever together." It's a neat reference to the Sword of Night and Flame, which has links to the Carrions as well. So in the end, she stayed in the Land of Shadow, becoming the Sword of Messmer. All her items are fascinating, and I can't wait to learn more about her lore. In this area, I also found Rellana's Cameo, which is a new talisman that increases the damage done by stance weapons. Any weapon that requires you to enter a stance will have its damage increased. This would be great with the Milady, obviously, and there's probably a cool build you could do with the Milady where you make use of its amazing guard counter. And speaking of guard counters, another thing that will make guard counters amazing in Elden Ring is a new crystal tier for your wondrous physic flask. This new crystal tier, if I understand it right, unlocks a perfect block mechanic in Elden Ring, whereby You probably take no stamina damage if you time your block perfectly with an enemy's attacks. You guys probably know that I'm a huge fan of Sekiro's parry system, and I always thought it was a huge missed opportunity that Elden Ring didn't incorporate this system in some way, but now it seems they are bringing it over with this crystal tier, at least. There were 2 other NPCs I met in the DLC. One was named Tholier, and he was a really demure man who had an obsession with poison. He sold the deadly poison perfume bottle as well as some other weapons besides. The other NPC I met was named Egon, and you could hear him screaming in pain from a great distance. But even then he was swearing revenge upon some dragon that had wronged him. So I put Egon out of his misery, of course, and as I did, he fought back with some Dragon Communion spells. This clued me in that he might be a Dragon Communion warrior, and a lot of the items he dropped when I killed him confirmed that. I had to do it for the lore. You guys understand. But the truly fascinating thing is that there's an invader that attacks you just up the path from Egon, and they invade you, but they don't look like a regular human invader. So it looks like we're getting a new humanoid dragon form. Every From Software game's gotta have one, it seems. As far as the lore goes, there's probably only 2 more extremely important things to discuss. I didn't fight this enemy, but I heard from someone else in the room that there was a boss called Godwin's Loyal Knight. This boss gave you its axes upon defeat, which apparently were really cool. They apparently let you teleport around while you're attacking with them. But apparently, these axes were called Death Knight's twin axes, which seems to be a pretty big hint that Godwin has knights that serve him after his death, which could imply that the Prince of Death is a force in this world, even now, which is a pretty big revelation. But that's pretty much it from me. I'm going to leave you with a list of all the rest of the item descriptions that I transcribed while I was at the event. And if you're in the camp that doesn't care about spoilers, then I hope you get a lot out of these. Of course, if you're a creator who wants to use some of these item descriptions or footage from my video to make some speculation content, of course, go for it. Of course, thank you for watching as well. And this will probably be my last DLC video until the game comes out, so I'm looking forward to that. And I'll see you in the next one.